civil rights and civilization inching forward, where so often today in the news we see it not just inching, but racing back. I thought about the civil rights movement, and I just realised how very much Fanny Campbell had done. So let me tell you about her. She was born in 1809 into a theatrical family, in the way that there were just theatrical dynasties in those days. You know, her aunt was Sarah Siddons of Garrix, her father was Charles Campbell, who ran the Covent Garden Theatre, and so on and so on. And she was very bright. She wasn't really interested in the stage, but once things got very tricky for the theatres, her father realised he had to find a new star. So he pretty much dragooned her onto the stage at age 19, and she was an overnight sensation and became a celebrity. But being a celebrity in those days was rather more dignified business than it is now. And so she went along with it and was wined and dined by the, you know, she was front page news, and they actually did, even in 1832, print mugs with people's faces on. I don't know how they did it, and it was hers. So she was the big star of the day, the hello figure of the day, if you like. Things again went down with the Reform Act gathering pace and so on and so on, and the theatres were closing. So Charles Campbell, her father, said, we've got to go to America on tour. Now, being on tour in America in 1833 was a big thing. There's very few theatre troops had done it. So he took her and they did Romeo and Juliet. And the thing I think is really weird, she was Juliet, she was fabulous. The thing I think is kind of slightly odd is her father, was Romeo. Anyway, overnight sensation again, and she became the toast of Boston and New York and Philadelphia. And the tour went around, and she wrote lots of letters home and wrote in her diary, and had kind of quite fun, but really she wanted to get back to her writing her books. But something odd happened in that because she was a celebrity there too, there were all types of rich young men sitting in the front row night after night and delivering flowers to her hotel and so on. And then lo and behold, to cut a long story short, she married one of them. Poor old Charles Campbell had to go home with the rest of the troupe and start making do in Covent Garden again. And she settled down with a man called Pierce Butler, who lived in Philadelphia. But his money came from the plantations in the south, in the Georgia Sea Islands, which is that bit in that bight of the South Atlantic where everything just sinks. It's very miasmic, it's the Venice of the way of North America. It's a very mystifying region, but very good for rice and cotton. So she went down with him when they went from Philadelphia to live on his plantations in Georgia. It wasn't Tara. And again, to cut another long story short, she was absolutely horrified. The marriage collapsed. It was disastrous. She just was appalled at the state that the plantations were kept in, the state of the slaves and so on, and implored her husband. He wasn't interested. Years went by, they got divorced. He, of course, got everything, including custody of the girls. And she eventually went back to England and started doing a one-woman theatre show. Anyway, fast forward to 1860, by the time she is 50. And the Civil War is building up ahead of steam. And she realises, Fanny Campbell does, that it's crucially important that the Yankee cause is supported in the UK, because the Yankees were against slavery, and it was not at all sure whether it would or not. So she decides to write a book, a journal of a residence on a Georgian plantation, and it's one of the most evocative accounts of the reality of slavery. As I say, the book could have been called Not Tara, that I've ever read. And when I was following in her footsteps in Georgia, I came across on a silted up land where her plantation used to be, a big sign put up by the Georgia Historical Society saying this is the site of the Butler Plantation. And Southern historians still say to this day that Fanny Campbell helped them lose the war, because her book changed the tide of public opinion in the UK. And that's not a bad thing to do at any age, and in that age in particular, when you were a middle-aged woman, I think it was quite an extraordinary achievement, and she was doughty to the last and won through, and I just thought she was the most marvellous example of what the human spirit can achieve, and I was pleased to be able to at least acknowledge her in some way in this book. So very quickly, I felt in a way about her that she'd lived life enough for all 7 of us, you know. She'd just done so much. After the war, when her book had been a huge success and slavery was gone and all the rest of it, she returned to America. She her daughters were living there and various things. And she said the country was no longer English. And that was really the point of my stopping my book in 1877, because it wasn't any longer English, because it couldn't be English anymore. It had become America. So that's when the whole account that I wanted to tell through my girls' words came to an end. Just 2 words about some of the other my six girls. The last one I found kind of, well, I found it by mistake. I'm sure my colleagues would agree. We found all the best things. I knew I had to have a homesteader, because homesteaders, the women who left, poor women who left Britain in the 19th century and went to America, landed on some, benighted sod of earth, absolutely nothing, and 5 children. And then built a cottage, and then went on and on, and they were the people who really created them out. Anyway, I found this Yorkshire woman, Rebecca Erland, and she went to America, to Illinois, in 1835. She went, of course, in steerage, took 6 weeks. She had 5 children, she was breastfeeding another, and she had to cook for them every night in steerage. They went up the Mississippi, and then changed boats and went down to Illinois. And they'd taken a lease on a little bit of land. And literally, they got off in the darkness. I love the boat, let them off. And literally, these 5 children were baby, 2 almost illiterate people from Yorkshire, and they just sat down on this bit of earth. And she wrote later, where she dictated to her son, she said, I said to my husband, is this America? And she was the only woman of the 6 who I didn't follow in her footsteps, because the part of Illinois where she settled, she didn't travel, she just settled, and the part of Illinois where she settled is complete development. There was no point in me going there. But I thought to myself, you know what, all those children, they stayed there. I just want to tell you this one thing, because it shows you what the internet is for. All those children she had, it's quite an unusual surname, Berland. I thought, I bet you I could find one of the relatives and, to send them. And by the end of that day, I had a photograph of her great-great-great-grandson, William Berland, who was a lawyer in Illinois, standing between the graves of his two ancestors who just discovered that bit of Pike County and so on. And that was Rebecca. 3 more things. They were all writers, with the exception of Rebecca, who dictated, and they were all escaping one thing or another, or trying to find something or another, and they all took refuge in the sanctuary of the page. And that was a very powerful concept for me, something I've written about a lot before, the sanctuary of the page, and escaping into writing, and writing happily, and redemption through writing. So that became the theme of the book. I gave them all a little picture, which seemed to me to sum them all up, and then at the end, so it's all just each one of those little length like this. One was Fanny Torres and Terry, which did that one. Jane Austen's niece was the 6th one, who went to San Francisco and raised her, and the 7th one is me, so we all have a family secret. And the last thing, before I finish, is that I'm just going to read to you the last 2 paragraphs of the introduction of Oh My America. I know that you're all well read enough, you'll know that the title of My America comes from a John Donne poem. And I know you also know that that poem doesn't have anything to do with America at all. It has something to do with something else entirely, but that impinges on all our lives, one of the big themes. So this is the last 2 paragraphs I'm going to there. This is the last 2 paragraphs of the introduction. In short, this is a book about how middle-aged women respond when life puts the boot in, told against the period in which America was establishing both its borders and its identity. After so many years writing about explorers with frozen beards, that's what I have done for many years, write about Antarctic. After so many years writing about explorers with frozen beards, spending my life with women proved a joy. My subject spoke to me across the years, voices from what was once the distant shore of middle age, where women ceased to exist. How suddenly it had come close. All biographers have hidden impulses, and in some sense I was looking for clues. How to forge forward myself into that colourless land of barren women. I was going through a gloomy phase when I began thinking about this book. The shadow of late middle age, my children needing me less, me needing them more, the wheel turning. Writing Oh My America liberated me. Through it all, on the road and at my desk, my characters were the best company a writer could hope for. Spirited, intelligent, funny, and inconsistent. I thought I was the luckiest author in the world to have found them. They were sometimes incontinently human, throwing tantrums, being bossy, running away, and that was when I loved them most, though I did not side with them, just as I try not to side with myself. My goal was always the complete sympathy of complete detachment. That was the King's words. There was poetry in the girls' moral dramas, and they made me realise what an unending adventure it is to be human. That is the larger argument that spools through Oh My America. Women like those depicted in these pages exist everywhere. I see their faces every day on the tube. I had more fun writing this book than all my previous books put together, and if I can impart a fraction of that enjoyment to the reader, I will not have entirely failed to honour the spirit of these 6 noble individuals who refused to give up. My working title was No Surrender. After all, dying comes to us all in the end. Living is a trick.